Hi, I'm Joe Gore for Premier Guitar Magazine, and we're coming to you from the 2018 NAMM show in Anaheim, California, the big gear event of the year. And I am privileged to be hosting the first of a series of daily live webcasts where we get together with some of the movers and shakers in the gear industry. And our focus for this first installment is modeling. And I've got two very prestigious guests from companies that have done a great deal of work in that field. And allow me to let you introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Eric Klein, Senior Product Manager at... Yay, David, that's my guy right there! Senior Product Manager at Line 6, and I'm responsible for Helix products.
I'm Sean Halley. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Positive Grid, and I'm responsible for... Yay, exactly, thank you very much, thank you. And I just, check this out, my iWatch just did that, just now, it just popped off. And yeah, so but I've also been involved in modeling since the dawn of time, so you probably recognize me from the 11 rack videos and the Helix videos and everything else, so I'm very well familiar with all levels of it.
And our topic today is modeling past, present, and future. I think we're going to focus a great deal less on the past than on the present and future. But just to make sure we're up to date, I'd like to have both guys introduce their latest and greatest and what they're emphasizing at the show. And just briefly, I should mention that I've done consulting work in this field, and I have been paid by Line 6 and by other sound design companies, so I'm a total scuzz. You first this time. Tell me what's the latest things you're proud about.
Well, so we just released the new version of Bias Amp 2. So Bias Amp software is one of the three members of our Bias suite, and our philosophy, company-wise, is component-based modeling, which is being able to mix and match actual component-level pieces. So tubes, transformers, tone stacks, you know, basically power amps, preamps, that kind of stuff. So you're not really stuck with what someone's idea of a model of an amp should sound like. You can do your own stuff. So the amp has new tubes, new transformers, has new multi-mic speaker capability. We have a partnership with Celestion. So one of the cool things about that is that we've taken Celestion IRs and we've embedded them into custom cabs. So as opposed to having to load individual files to try out different mic positions, you can now just move the mic around, and we interpolate between all those custom mic positions for you, so it's way easier to use. And that's the backbone for all of our hardware, our guitar head hardware. So those products will also get the same benefits that you get from Bias Amp 2.
And Eric, you two are showing off a software-based project piggybacking on your Helix platform.
We have a new firmware update for Helix floor, Helix rack control, and Helix LT 2.5. Thank you. The big news is that we've now included all of the old M-Class effects, going all the way back to DL4 back in '99. So instantly overnight 77 classic effects from Line 6, as well as 5 new reverbs, a new delay, the Friedman BE100 amp model, and the Mesa Lone Star model as well. As far as hardware, we're showing our brand new HX processor, which is made for pedalboard and amp guys, which is ironic because it's a modeling panel, but that product was made specifically for people who either haven't been interested in amp modeling all the way to people who actively despise amp modeling, and we love them all, but yes.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, by the way, a big, huge miss for me, that we're also introducing our mini twin pedals. So they're finally available, which are our modeling pedals, and the Bias Mini head. So Bias Mini bass, Bias Mini guitar, which are half rack size, 300 watt power amp guys that still do all the component stuff with Bluetooth wireless in it. So forgot that.
And
sorry.
If you guys forget anything else, feel free to inject it later. I know I'm going to forget a lot of things. But ironically, you both touched on topics that I was hoping to discuss today. One of them was component-based modeling versus the alternative, and the other was ways of mixing and matching traditional analog gear with digital gear, pretty much exactly what you just said. So you're helping jog my feeble memory. What is your take on, do you have any sense that there's a generational changing of the guard in terms of attitudes about amp modeling? You know, old boomers like me were raised with a lot of preconceptions that are systematically being proved wrong. Do you feel like you're addressing a different audience than you did when especially when Line 6 was starting out, and that younger players have a more accepting view of modeling?
I might suggest it's the opposite. We found that, especially when it comes to Helix, we've been really popular with the musicians who've kind of been there, done that. They have their favorite amps, they have their favorite pedals, but now they're in a cover band and they need tons of tones available at once, or they're in church and they need to cover a lot of sonic territory very quickly. Whereas the younger audience is still really into creating pedal boards. And we recognize that and we appreciate that, and there are all the young people at Line 6 are really excited about the stuff that doesn't necessarily include amp modeling. So there's room for everybody. Certainly.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think there's a shift that happens with technology across all generational things. And if you think about when you first were on email, you knew a lot of people that weren't. And when you first had your iPhone, you knew a lot of people that were still in flip phones. And it basically, as time marches on, as technology improves, it becomes more a fabric of everyone's life. And I think people are just more used to looking at things in a different way now. And especially if you look at the paradigm, what happened in studio mixing, lots of guys for years had a huge console sitting in the control room with 2 faders up on it that was the return from Pro Tools, but they kept the console there as a way to continue to attract large clients. But at some point, the budgets were small enough, the timetables were more advanced enough that they had to be able to do a recall immediately. You couldn't just take a day to do a recall anymore for a tune. You had to be able to pull it up, and they had to change. So what Eric's talking about, like guys that play praise music, guys that play in cover bands, the expectation is now, hey, I know there are products out there now that can do all these sounds and do them pretty convincingly, so you have to go investigate that. So even there are people that might probably be reticent to look at that kind of technology from a personal standpoint, but their situation kind of forces them to get into it. And when they do, they find that they're probably pleasantly surprised. It's pretty freaking great now.
And it's a lot lighter than lugging 2 tube amps up,
totally
up the
lighter.
stairs, yeah.
And I'd like to return to the topic you brought up about the component modeling. Now, all these products are digital descriptions of a sound. And if, say, I'm using an amp model interface that replicates every stage of the signal path with different types of transformers, but if transformer A has slightly more low-end presence than transformer B, we're still just moving numbers around. Is system, in terms of creating these sounds, is component modeling really a significant departure?
Well, Helix does component modeling. So the difference between what Helix does and what our stuff does is that we're just sort of making those pieces more visible. So definitely everyone should not be under the idea that Helix doesn't do component modeling, because those sound designer guys are in there looking at individual components and trying to look at each component and see how it behaves. It's the same thing we do. The difference is that we're sort of making those components a bit more visual and allowing people to play with them. I mean, for me personally, I always want custom stuff. If you look at my videos and stuff, you'll see all sorts of weird guitars with weird colors and weird things on them and stuff, and it's because I like custom things. But by no means is it a quality issue. I mean, Eric, you should talk about how, the sound design process works for Helix. I mean, it's pretty involved. I mean, component-based modeling, it's important, I think, I'll just say this, it's important that whatever product you're looking at does at least have a component-based philosophy under the hood, because that's where the accuracy is.
Yeah, and there are companies like Fractal who do a similar thing to Bias, where they don't obfuscate anything. They're like, let's let the user go in and tweak it exactly the way they want, which gives you a lot of power as well. Whereas Line 6's philosophy is, let's see if we can't. We admittedly obfuscate some parameters because we want people to get the tone in their head faster, and there is definitely there's an option anxiety thing with our customers that may be less prevalent with Fractal users or Kemper users who create their own profiles, and it's just a different philosophy, and one isn't better than the other. It's just different.
Yeah, if there's any one thing that the last 2 years of our industry have taught guitar players, is that user interface and user experience matter, like wholly matter. The success of a couple products like Helix and like Bias Amp and a couple of these other products, that wouldn't have been possible without the kind of user interface that that box has, and without the kind of user interface that we have, because the option anxiety is true. It's a real thing. I mean, you look at a huge host of features and a huge host of options and just decide, I just want a preset, for God's sake, just give me a preset. A lot of people are like that. And the difference is that I think people are becoming more used to picking the top level of something and then tweaking. You know what I mean? Like a Helix thing, you pick a patch and then you can still tweak it. Bias thing, you pick a patch, you can still tweak it, as opposed to just give me a scan that I can't ever change.
It's the difference between GarageBand Logic and Max MSP. How deep down the rabbit hole are you comfortable going?
And as a product reviewer and a consumer who uses these tools every day, I would absolutely second that. I think Line 6 and Positive Grid have really set the standard for a more fun, lively, lucid, frankly kind of Apple-inspired user experience, and it's noticeable. It's a lot more fun to work with that stuff than a tiny LCD screen.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree. I mean, I was just talking with another reviewer about the idea that the difference between a mobile experience versus a desktop experience, where we're all guitar players, and I'm a highly technical guitar player. It doesn't mean that everyone is, but I still like getting on a mobile app and going nah, 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 because I don't have to think. I don't have to know what the value is of anything. I just go, nah, give me that. You know what I mean? Which is awesome. And and the reality is that you can be a highly technical person, but you still want the nah.
Well, I'm gonna beg to differ with you, because am I correct in saying that you made your first big splash on mobile?
Yeah, Positive Grid did make our first big splash on mobile. It's true. It's true.
And it was literally one of your products where it was the first time where I powered it up and thought, yep, you could make keeper tracks on an iPad. I was skeptical before.
Yep. And it's a lot of people don't sort of, Positive Grid has been a very small company, and we started out in the mobile space, which means that we've only been making hardware for the past couple years, year and a half, 2 years, whatever. Mm-hmm. But before they brought out that first version of Bias Amp, they spent a couple years, 2 or 3 years, on the underlying technology first, as opposed to just making an iPad app. They realized, there's a lot of, put it this way, our CEO is a very forward-thinking cat, and they thought, all right, if we made a company that was going to be able to do all this crazy stuff in 10 years, what we would need was the backbone technologically. So they did that, which is smart. But yeah, it definitely changed the idea for a lot of people, I think.
Bring me up to date. Is there a user modeling component to Helix, or is something in the works? I know that Helix currently supports loading speaker IRs, though for now the length of the sample is limited to just kind of speaker type sounds.
We've had people ask for the ability to do not necessarily profiling, but frequency matching, and that other companies have attempted, and it's something we could do. I don't know that it's prevalent enough. That's not to say we won't. I'm fascinated by immediate gratification, and we've found, I don't know what the numbers are, and I don't know that Christoph would give them up, but I'd be really interested in what percentage of, say, Kemper Profiler owners actually profile their own amps. And that's not to say that the profiling technology is.
I'm sure it's low.
And it's brilliant. It's brilliant, and it's completely different from component-based modeling. And a lot of people are asking for a profile player, but the underlying technology wouldn't save any money by removing that functionality. If it's something that enough people demand, it's something we would do, but we generally try to avoid, okay, that company does that, let's do that too. If it solves a particular problem that the user has, we try to find a unique way to solve it without saying just checking a box.
And they do have, and there is power amp. There is some granularity in the power amp section. You can change some tube bias and some things like that in Helix. It's not just a set preset. But I know what you're saying. I think we offer amp match technology in Bias Amp, and it's fairly easy to use. But even then, I don't think that a lot of people probably use it as much.
Do you find that the customer has enough knowledge to do the proper miking technique?
That's
and the proper,
issue.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. The issue is,
does the end result match what's in their head, or is the end result more of a, oh, this is an interesting experiment? Let's
Exactly, and it's one of those things where I think you'll probably agree that the customer, the Kemper customer that is solid enough and strong enough and a good enough engineer to record their own amps and profile their own amps.
Like Michael Britt.
Exactly. If you're Michael Britt, who's a buddy of ours, by the way, if you're Michael Britt, you know how to mic an amp, you know which preamps to use, you know how to get the right sounds. You're probably the same kind of person that would handle a weird UI, because that's part of your personality. That's part of what you want to do. It is different for a person who has a cool amp maybe and kind of has a bedroom with carpet and kind of has a 57 and doesn't exactly know how to get the right thing out of it and doesn't have the ability to listen to it in context and a track to even know if it's the right size. That kind of person is probably not the same kind of person that's going to deal with a crazy hexy UI. So it's a learning curve and a balance.
But the cool thing is, it's there if you want it. If you plan on maybe doing it someday, you can sleep at night knowing it's there.
It's a Maserati. You still have to take your kids to school, but it will do 185. Sorry, it's Joe.
I couldn't speak on that, having lost my license and I can't drive. But am I not correct that the word profiling appears very prominently in some of your product names?
No.
Did that change?
Profiler?
Profiling, yeah.
Don't think so.
Okay.
So because a profile is slightly different. So we do amp matching. We do matching.
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I misspoke. I meant matching, not
yes,
profiling.
we do match. Yes, but profiling is different.
Explain.
So what a Kemper does is it does a scan. It does a full scan, and it's looking for harmonics, and it's looking for saturation, it's looking for all this kind of stuff, and it gives you back a convolution, basically like a piano sample. You can think of it like a piano note. So when you play a note on a grand piano, you can't. Well, Eric knows better. All I'm saying is that the end result. Eric knows better about this. The end result is you can't modify that note. If you want a different amp sound, you have to rescan the amp. If you want more bass, if you want more drive, you have to reshoot the amp.
It's quite a bit more clever than that.
I know.
I know what you're getting.
But you know what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the end result is that, like on a MIDI grand piano, you play a bass note. You can't change the resonance of that bass note. You can't go inside the sample and change what the hammers were used on the piano. You would have to re-record the piano, and Kemper kind of works like that. So the idea is that it creates a really lovely representation of the current sound of the amp and the mic on it. Does a great job of it, but you can't change anything. So if you want to change the gain, you want to change the bass, you want to change the treble, you want to change anything, you have to mic it up again.
Well, you can. It's not necessarily.
But it's a channel strip afterwards. I mean, it's like putting a channel strip on a console afterwards, right? Isn't it? Is it or no?
It's. I've had it explained to me 4 or 5 times.
Okay, got it.
I am not an engineer.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's extremely clever, and
right.
and my hat's off to Kemper.
Yeah, sure.
And,
it works great. It works awesome.
The profiling engine is. I'm not going to explain how I think it's
cool.
how I think it works.
I probably made a mistake by even doing that.
Because I'm going to be wrong.
Yeah.
But
actually, if you can just cut this live stream and cut the last 3 minutes of what I said. And just say that it's great, it works awesome. We all know that it works awesome. I'm just saying that it's not as malleable a sound as something that's built from the inside out. When you build something from the outside in, it's not as malleable as when it's built from the inside out. That's the way it works. That's life.
And pardon me for doing the equivalent of looking at my watch, but how much time have we got, Sean?
Oh, let me look at mine.
As long as we keep talking. Awesome. Okay, well, that gives me a fine introduction into one of the more meta concepts.
Oh God!
Yeah.
Oh Jesus!
Man, I'm gonna nail you to the freaking wall, man.
God.
The wall.
Yeah.
We love you, Sean.
Well, I think all three of us have been pretty heavily involved in mimicking analog sounds in digital in one way or another, and one byproduct of doing that work is that you realize that modeling extant amps is a infinitesimal fraction of the possible things one could do once you move into the liquid environment of digital audio. And we all know why everybody emphasizes popular traditional analog gear. Largest user base, lowest barrier to entry, making the marketing point that you can have a $30,000 amp collection for a $199, and we all get it. But is there any chance that on the horizon that we will unleash the Kraken a little bit more and be less hung up on imitating sounds that everybody already knows and loves, and become a little exploratory? And I know that both of you both of your products include custom variations, and I know that Line 6 in particular has been pretty bold about, here's the 3 or 4 or 6 wah-wah pedals you know and love, and here's a cool one we came up with that we happen to think works well in this environment. So I'm not saying a lack of creativity or skill, but maybe a
I don't think that's caused by any lack of desire by our companies or any other companies. It's just following the market.
It's processing speed too.
It'd be one thing if there were 50,000 people saying, "Hey, Line 6, I want an amp that sounds this and behaves this way," but they don't. They say, "Hey, Line 6, I really want a Friedman BE100." Like, oh, okay.
And I think that you're to the larger meta concept of it. A lot of it is what we're capable of doing from a processing perspective. I mean, if you look at the way you model an amp from a component basis, you look at all the dynamic things, and the more processing power you have to be able to describe dynamic things, how when you hit the note hard, all the bass is sucked out of it by the power supply, and then as you hold the note, that bass is let back into the sound by the power supply. That's a dynamic process. Everything about the way that a real amp interacts with a guitar is dynamic. Every single thing about it almost. There's almost nothing that's static other than basically a resistor. And to truly get closer to that, you just need more and more dynamic processes to be able to describe those things, and that just takes a lot of computer power. Once all that stuff gets taken care of, yeah, it would be really awesome if all of a sudden you had that kind of computer power to be able to say, what would happen if I had a guitar on Mars and it was played by someone from Bali on the equator with MIDI? See where I'm going?
So what you do is you take an amp that you know and love, but there are little quirks about it that you don't like, and you put it in the digital domain, and then you fix it. The problem is, as soon as you fix it, people are like, "That's not the amp." Exactly. So
sound like my AC30.
It's about having a happy medium. So, and if we can kind of egg people on to make more interesting tones with crossover splits or new effects or controller assignments, and making that as transparent a process as possible, we're hoping that people will rely less on the past and try to make cool new things.
Yeah. My question referred less to the desire or ability of people to do that as much as I'm really more asking, do you think the marketplace will ever open up in that way where something like that can become cost effective?
What's that?
We're going to force
them to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think part of the problem is that everything about music, speaking as a musician and a session musician and a producer, and music has become so marginalized in some ways that people just want to make stuff that is popular. And I think as music recovers from the sort of preset mentality and the autotune mentality and the boy band mentality and all that kind of stuff that's basically taken over the world, where that's basically market driven, as soon as the actual the world of music recovers, I think people will be seeking new things more. But at the moment, people just want, they want to, there's little money left, so they want as much of that money as they can get. So if something was successful last week by doing it this way, they will try to do the same thing that way to be successful this week. And it affects the quality of music. It affects the originality of music that we all listen to. Eric's got a fantastic record collection. They listen to really, really interesting stuff, but a lot of people have to search really hard to find that stuff because they're not as that music isn't popular either. And the people that are making that music and that are trying to find those sounds and neat things, they're having to yell to be heard above the clamor of the latest Me Too song from whatever song mill we're talking about.
It's Me Too that does that. That's the band.
We all do it. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, we all do it.
No,
I've done
Oh,
it.
yeah, sure.
I do this boy band. Me too.
I have
Me too.
30 Linkin Park sound-alikes from the mid-'90s that I had to write because I needed to check.
Sweet. I was always torn between being the jazz bow and also really wanting to make pop records. So it's tough. Tough thing.
And another factor in determining the breadth of products, and again, this is an area where your two companies specifically are, to my mind, leading the way, is how you integrate your product across all platforms. You seem very tuned into the idea that maybe someone concocts an idea on their phone and develops it on their iPad and then wants to be able to bring the patch into their studio to record the track. And it's a huge technological challenge to have that sort of vertical integration. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, it's Google has this thing they call micro moments, which applies to marketing and user experience, but it's everything. People want what they want now. And so if you're trying to sell products or you're trying to make products that you don't have some sort of mobile component to, it's tricky because people are starting things on their phone, they're moving to an iPad or something. I was surprised, because it's not me, I was surprised when all of the iPad DAWs started popping up and people were really using them. It's like, why would you need 64 tracks on an iPad, for God's sake? Just go home. But that is home for people. A lot of people do. So I think the integration across multiple platforms is definitely something that we take very seriously. It's definitely something that is in our thought process and plan. I can tell you that a large number of transaction and purchases and things like that you would think would be desktop only are actually initiated in the mobile space. So there are definitely changes going on in the way that people are interacting with their music and interacting with their, how do you get more of the time they're spending as a musician, So that's the ask. The ask is how do you get more time? The trick is trying to integrate it in such a way that it's seamless.
How do you compete with Instagram?
Exactly. How do you compete with Instagram? How do if you're a parent, how do you keep your child from swearing? It's hard.
And how about from your perspective? I when Helix came out, I know that one of the something that was very important was to have the software version of Helix be completely interchangeable with the hardware incarnations.
The impetus was the problem of finishing a record, and how do you have to go on tour in 3 weeks, and so you hire somebody to translate that stuff into whatever pedal board or modeler you're using, and sometimes you spend weeks and thousands of dollars getting that stuff ready, and we thought if we could just make that process seamless and transfer your tones from the studio to the stage and back, it was all about solving the problem. And then going forward, we wanted to make sure that same platform can be fed into a number of use cases. So if you're a pedal board guy, we don't want you to not have to play within that space. We want to solve those problems as wide as we can.
And one final question for both you guys. If we're lucky enough to be sitting here 5 years from now having a similar discussion, what do you anticipate we'll be talking about? I'm not asking you to divulge any kind of in-house secrets, but what's your sense of what this space might look like 5 years from now?
That's Eric's milieu.
I think I would love to have some sort of agreement between all of the different companies, and it'll never happen, but the next MIDI, and I don't mean a control protocol over a DIN cable, I mean some sort of universal platform that's free and open source that you see
OMF, like basically
the Empress Zoya yet? Huh. I've been raving about it online. This thing is completely nuts, and the first thing I think of is I want our product to control that, out things back and forth. And I mean, the synth guys kind of have a head start on us, so they tend to be more open to technology. If you look at where the synth industry is going, and it's Eurorack stuff and modular stuff, and yet MIDI is still the standard. Like, what is the MIDI for guitar besides MIDI?
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think it's an open interchange format or something. I think it's a great idea. It's a hard sell. But
we'll grab dinner and we'll figure it out.
No, we should totally do that. Awesome.
Can I come?
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. Of course.
Hey guys, Sean Hammond with Premier Guitar also. I wanted to hop in and thank Sean and Eric for joining us, and for Joe.
Thanks.
Recording guitarist, columnist. He does reviews for us. You guys know him. Makes his own cool pedals too. He didn't even
Yeah, the new
plug
pedals
that.
are cool, by the way. They look awesome.
Very cool
People
pedals.
were freaking out about them on the gear page.
I just wanted to thank you guys for coming. This was a great discussion. There were a lot of people listening in and offering comments. And I want to remind everyone watching now that we're going to be doing live streams like this, our Gear Guru live streams every day of NAMM. So tomorrow, the next day, Friday, tomorrow we'll have Oliver Ackerman from Death by Audio and Ben Hines from Dwarfcraft Devices. He'll be here talking. They're going to be talking about weirdo pedals. I'm sure you were here for that.
I'm big fans of both their work.
So that will be at 11 a.m. Pacific tomorrow. So join us for that. Thanks again, guys.
Awesome.
Catch you later.
Thanks.